Bonjour tout le monde. Aujourd'hui, on va parler du passé composé. Donc, c'est le premier ou la première leçon du dossier 5. You'll see passé composé a lot, so it's very important that you go over it after we've done this lesson multiple times because if you're taking 201 next semester, you'll see it again. Okay. First of all, what do we know about the composed past? I know for sure in English we don't use that. It's only in French, okay? We have a lot of tenses when it comes to past tense. We have passé composé, imparfait, plus que parfait, you name it. But for this particular lesson or the course, you're only going to be learning about passé composé and imparfait. So, passé composé is when you're using it pour raconter des événements passés. Okay, so it's one particular event that happened once in the past. So whether it be yesterday, last week, last month, or l'année dernière, so last year. The way that it's formed is what makes it interesting. Passé composé always comes in two. So first of all, you'll have your auxiliaire, which is avoir or etre, and we'll see when to use when or what. And then participe passé. So whatever verb is given to you in brackets, you're going to be making that into a participe passé. And that as well has its rules. Okay. So for instance, je mange une pomme tous les jours. So for this one, I know it's present because I'm saying every day, right? So it's something habitual. Now, if I want to say I ate an apple yesterday, so that's a particular event that happened in the past. So that's when you're going to be using passé composé. So the way it's being done is you take the auxiliary, avoir or etre, you conjugate that to présent, depending on your pronoun, followed by le participe passé. Okay, so if I were to translate or put that into the past, it will be j'ai mangé une pomme hier. Same thing, if you're going to the theaters every weekend, right, that would be in present because it's something that you do on a regular basis, right? It's not something that happened once and that's it. So you'll say je vais au cinéma tous les week-ends. So vais again, it's the verb aller, n'est-ce pas? It's one of the irregular one. That's what's vais. So if I were to put that into the past, je suis allé au cinéma le week-end passé, right? So last weekend, I went to the cinema. So notice that here I'm using avoir. Here I'm using etre. So why is there a change? For you to know the difference between whether you're using avoir or etre, you're going to have to memorize Dr. and Mrs. Van der Tramp, okay? I know every time I teach this course, I get little giggles because of Dr. Mrs. Van der Tramp, but she's very helpful. The reason being is all of these verbs, you use être with them, okay? So like I've mentioned right there, you'll probably see that in class as well. All of these verbs will take être as an auxiliary. Anything that does not fall into this category, you'll use avoir. Notice that with être, like you may have seen this a lot with the tenses, you need to make the accord based on the subject. Okay? Elle est devenue actrice. She became an actor, an actress. So you're going to have to add your E at the end, but not with avoir. Okay? Moving on to the participe passé. So this is the auxiliary, avoir or être. Now we're going to be talking about how does the participe passé, so the verb itself, how does it change? If you have a verb that ends in er, aimer, adorer, corriger, aller, etc., what you do is, let me find my box here. Okay, it ends in er. What you do is you take away the er and you add the accent aigu. And then, of course, you add your accord depending on whether it's être. Okay. For instance, nous avons dansé à la discothèque ce week-end, right? That weekend, so something in the past. this in infinitive is the verb to dance, ends with er. You take away the er, you add your e accent aigu. Notice that danser is not part of Dr. Mrs. Vandertram, sorry. So you're using avant and you're not doing the accord, okay? So I'm just gonna go straight to this because I've probably already went over this in class. Les filles sont allées au marché l'année dernière. So the girls went to the market last year. If you look at the table for Dr. Mrs. Vandertramp, you'll see aller there. So that means your auxiliary needs to be etre. Okay. So again, this is the verb aller. You take away the er. You add your e accent aigu. Because girls are féminin pluriel, you're adding the es. Okay. So same thing avec il est allé à Toronto l'année dernière. Aller, again, you take away the er, you add e accent aigu, but il c'est masculin singulier, so you don't do anything at the end. Now, when you have les verbes du deuxième groupe, so any verb that ends in ir, you're going to be taking out the ir, you're adding an I, right? J'ai fini mon travail le mois dernier. Donc, on a finir, n'est-ce pas? On retire le IR, on ajoute un I. Okay? And again, you'll see that finir is not part of Dr. Mrs. Vandertramp. So you're not doing any accord to it, and you're using avoir as the auxiliary. Partir is part of Dr. Mrs. Vandertramp, so you take away the IR. Assuming, let's just say you're a girl, you're adding the I and the E after, right? Because tu could be, depending on whoever you're talking about, could be masculine or feminine. There are, when it comes to the verb in IR and any verb in the third group, there's a lot of exceptions. So make sure that you're checking that regularly when you're doing these exercises. For instance, courir is a verb that ends in IR, but if you look at the participe passé, it does not end with an I, it ends with a U. Nous avons couru pour attraper l'autobus. So we ran to catch the bus. Okay. And again, here you'll see that it's not part of the list. So that's where you're using avoir for the auxiliary. Okay. Participe passé can be very tricky because of the ending. Okay. But for 102, we try to use a bit of the same verbs. But in case, you'll see that in class, I'll give you a list. In case that you're not sure, definitely check it on Google because a lot of times you might see that the exceptions will apply. Third group, as we all know, it's the group that we just throw everything in. Okay, so it could end with RE. You can have something like IR, but then it ends with ERT instead of I. You could have something that ends in OIR, right? So anything that you don't want in the first group or second group, you throw it in the third group. With that being said, there are pretty regular verbs that you might see in there. Again, you might have to Google depending on, or just simply ask me, depending on what the verbs are. But let's just say for prendre, it's not part of Dr. Mrs. Vandertramp, so you're going to be using auxiliaire avoir. Again, this has to be in présent, so elle a pris l'autobus ce soir. This will never change even though the subject changes, because remember, if you're using avoir, you're not doing any accord to the participe passé. It's only if you're using etre. Okay, so the participe passé of prendre is pris. Tu as ouvert la porte, that's the participe passé of ouvrir. Again, you're using avoir, so you're not doing anything to it. And same thing here, nous avons reçu le diplôme, we have received the diplomas. Okay, so again, because you're using avoir, even though nous is collective, it's plural, you're not adding an S there. So to end today's lesson, and again, I went pretty fast because again, you'll see all these slides on in class where I'll go in a lot more detail. but I just wanted to show you an example of an exam question from 2018. So the verbs or the sentences that are given are in présent. You're being asked to change this to passé composé. J'aime voyager. So first and foremost, what is the infinitive of this verb? It's aller. N'est-ce pas? I like to travel. You want to say I used to like to travel, right? So, je, not aller, sorry, aimer. You'll see that this is not part of Dr. Mrs. Van Tramp. You want to take a look at your list. So, j'ai, so that means you're using avoir. J'ai aimé voyager. Okay? This is an ER verb, and again, when it comes to ER verb, you take off the ER, you add E accent aigu. Because it's avoir and not etre, even though you're a girl, you're not going to put an E at the end. Same thing here, nous aimons le voyage. Again, we have the same verb in front of us. So nous, we're going to be using avoir. Nous avons aimé le voyage. No accord, because this is not part of Dr. and Mrs. Van Tramp. So it's not être. Okay, but let's take a look at this one. So you'll see that elles vont en voyage. So vont is le présent pour aller, n'est-ce pas? So they are going on a travel, for instance, right? You're using présent. So if I were to say they went, how would I change this to passé composé? So elles, take a look at your list. You'll see that aller is part of the list for Dr. and Mrs. Van Tramp. Okay. Sont, right? Because the auxiliary that means is être, aller. And don't forget your es because the auxiliary is être. Okay, so that means you need to do your accord. En voyage. Même chose ici, les voyageurs, c'est ils pluriel, n'est-ce pas? Ils sont allés, with an S, en bateau. So this might be something that you might get on a final or a midterm, right? So make sure that first of all with passé composé, the first question you're asking yourself is look at the verb. Is it part of the list that was given to you for Dr. and Mrs. Van Tramp? If it's not, you're using avoir as your auxiliary. If it is, you're using être as your auxiliary. For your participe passé, look at the ending. How does it end? Does it end in ER? Does it end in IR? Right? Always look for that. And then depending on your auxiliary that you're using, don't forget to make the accord at the end. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful. Again, if you have any question, please let me know. D'accord? À la prochaine!